Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Sunday Special. This is a long one. This is an interview with a good friend of mine, Chris Thoreau, who is an expert microgreens grower. And he's been farming about as long as I have, and we've known each other for pretty much that whole time. So today we're going to be talking about life after farming. He's sold his shares in his company, and he's still working in agriculture, but he's doing more things around education and outreach and research and development. So we're going to get into those things today. But before we start, I just wanted to mention a few quick things. One is I'm going to be in Florida November 8th through 11th. I got two events. Actually, there's three, but there's just two announced right now. One is in Orlando, a 2-day workshop, and a 1-day workshop in Stewart. I also want to mention that I have a new page on my website all about my profitable market gardening workshops, the 5-day workshops, and I do them at 4 different farms, and they're all really exciting farms. So check that out, theurbanfarmer.co/PMG. And lastly, I just want to mention and remind you guys about my list. Just in case something happens in YouTube where I'm no longer able to reach you guys, I send out an email every Friday, and it's basically just some stuff about what I'm thinking, what I'm into, maybe some of the more popular videos of the week, and I just send that out every Friday, and I put little announcements in there like I've got a gig here and so on and so forth. So if you want to stay up to date with myself and what I'm thinking about, sign up for that, and that's going to be in the show notes. All right guys, let's get into it. All right, Chris, well, thanks for coming by, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for the thanks for the drink.
Cheers. We're enjoying some nice Okanagan cider, and Chris has been hanging out. We hung out a couple days ago, and we were kind of riffing on this idea of when you stop farming, what do you do in your life? Where do you, what's next? What have we learned from farming? Anyways, so how's it been? It's been a year.
It's been a year and 2 weeks for me officially. So August 1st of 2017 is when I left the Food Peddlers, and probably like you, it was a transition out. Over the year before that, I was working a little less, doing a little less, passing off responsibility. So yeah, definitely a transition and then an ending. Even though not even a full ending, because I committed to staying on as a consultant for a year, so it's still engaged with them. But as of now, I'm officially free of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a very intentional transition. So it wasn't like getting pushed out. It wasn't leaving because of some medical thing. It was a rethinking of what do I want to do, where do I want to be, how well is this working.
Yeah.
And I had also had the opportunity to go back to school and do my master's,
which you aren't doing now.
I'm officially doing it for another 2 weeks, and then taking a bit of leave because I'm still too stretched.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the overarching themes in farming and then transitioning out of farming is getting some time back, getting some life back. That's not all about farming. Mm-hmm. And that was a part of the transition in the past couple of years. Still doing the microgreens pretty hard, still working with seed growers, still doing some consulting and other things, so quite into it, but also trail running and mountain biking.
Yeah, you really got into that then.
Yeah. And it was a real intentional shift towards like having that recreational part of my life, and other things that are fulfilling. And for so long, everything was about work and agriculture and sustainability and efficiencies and new systems, and that's great for a certain period of time for me. But at a certain point, I'm working my ass off all day, and my friends are like on a camping trip somewhere, or they're snowboarding, or they're somewhere else.
That's farming.
And
you just accept that you can't join people for these things.
Yeah, but that's a mistaken belief, right?
Absolutely, yes.
And what happened is when I started doing that stuff, I still had the same amount I could still get all the same amount of stuff done. I probably didn't procrastinate as much. I probably didn't dawdle as much. I got my stuff done, and then I moved on to the next thing.
Right.
Which might have been those things, even though they take energy, they burn calories, they also made me more fit. So I was in better shape. My endurance was better.
Better energy.
My mental headspace was better. All that stuff. Mm-hmm. And in about the past year and a half, when I haven't been running and doing that stuff as much, I feel myself losing that energy again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a matter of, not sort of living to work all the time, as important as it is for a certain period of time in developing a business to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
But also, living for other things, for friendships and social time and recreation time and competitiveness and
family.
travel and family, of course, yeah.
Because when you started doing microgreens in, was it your apartment was the first one? It was like on your kitchen or something like that?
So no, that was an interlude. So
that was the interlude, right,
yeah,
right.
So the full, if I was to go back, so from 2001 to 2007, I ran a small market garden in Victoria. So that was my introduction to agriculture. And in the last year of doing that, I had grown sprouts in a jar and done some things in the kitchen, and wanted to do something a little different with the farm at that time.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know. It's like, I used to grow these sunflower sprouts and wheatgrass, and nobody has that stuff at the market.
Right.
And there was an intimidation factor behind that stuff. It was too new for people. And so I went for it in my last year of farming, and I introduced microgreens to the market, and it went well. And that was just before I actually left farming the first time to go back to school. And I left to go back and do my degree in agroecology at UBC. But in leaving this rural environment to go to the city to learn about agriculture, there was a bit of dissonance there. So I wanted to come up with a model that I could use to still have hands-on in agriculture, and microgreens is where I got to. So that was moving from one city to another, starting school, and then having a child, sort of all happening at the same time, while at the same time trying to develop the system. Because what's interesting now, and I love this, 10 years ago now, microgreens were nothing like
Not
it is
a
now.
thing.
Like
Nothing.
there's a lot of great stuff out there. Obviously, we're both doing a lot of stuff. There's a lot of people doing cool stuff. Lots of videos, lots of supplies and equipment. 10 years ago, that wasn't there.
Nothing.
And so everything was very much figuring stuff out. What trays to use, what soil type to use, sourcing seeds, planting density. None of that information was out there.
That's right.
And so that was a lot of energy going into that. And I remember the days when I'm like, should I do this or should I not do this? Should I do this or should I not do this? The baby's crying. Okay. Bouncing on the ball.
I can't imagine.
And then being in school, right? And so there's a lot of pressure. Then I remember the point at which I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then things shifted. When I committed, it kind of shifted. And as you know, you just got to do things to see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of stuff in the beginning of my journey that put it on a very intense level right from the beginning.
Yeah, because it was academic. You were working with it.
And
had your son
and being a parent, and I was 33 at the time, so not a young parent.
Yeah.
I always said I got into microgreens 10 years too late. 23, 24.
You would have the energy to do
it all. The energy, the time, right? And so so a lot of that was sort of the energy that went in. So there was always development and parenting. And in parenting, in the beginning, every 3 months you have a new child. They change so quickly.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
So always adjusting.
That's
and then the academic, like exams and projects and group work. So it was a lot to manage in the beginning, and really maybe set the tone for this is what agriculture is in this context. Even though I had already done 6 years of running a farm before that.
Yeah.
But it was maybe about halfway through that. And I had thought about this years before, like, is this the model? Having seen a lot of people do agriculture for 10, 20, 30 years and watch their bodies sort of break. They had no recreation time. They had no, fun time. Their time with their children and their family, when I watched that, was always very strained. There was a lot of talk about wanting to be with their kids and their family, but when they were with them, it's like, it doesn't look very comfortable,
Yeah.
So I had a sense, maybe about my 5th year of growing, that, okay, there's got to be a better model than this, and started thinking about what that process would look like, of going from farming to education, to teaching others farming, to consulting, to other things. And really, I have to remind myself, that was something I thought of years ago, and I'm still kind of doing that. It was to transition out of farming and enable others to farm.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
to take a lot of that was taking away the physical and emotional stress.
Yeah.
And passing it on to somebody else.
Hey, because there's always new people, right?
Well, there's always new people, but 5 or 10 years of that is okay. A lifetime of that is not.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so that's what I think. Going to, when I left farming to go to school in that transition phase, there was a bit of an identity crisis. I was like, I've associated myself with being a grower for so long. Now I'm a student.
Yeah.
Now I'm an underling.
Yeah. You
Right?
just knocked down the pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which made for some difficult moments in class and arguments with professors and good discussions with professors as well.
Right.
But I didn't go through that the second time in leaving the food peddlers, because I looked at it as transitioning out, going from a sole proprietorship to a co-op, because I knew, one, that if I had a good team in place, that I wouldn't have to be relied upon for everything. Mm-hmm. Two, a co-op has more chance of succession than a sole proprietorship. So you might want to talk about this. When you're, Green City Acres is really Curtis Stone City Acres.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when you as the champion leave, the business often ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the co-op model, like I walked away from the model. I was bought out. I got my shares back.
Yeah.
New people bought in, and they're still running it.
Yeah.
And so part of it was letting stuff go, but still allowing it to continue because it has value.
Yeah. But when you first did this, I remember, I talked to you all through these years, and at first it seemed like, and I could be wrong on this, correct me if I'm wrong, but that when you first started the co-op, it wasn't necessarily your plan or ambition then to walk away from it.
No, at the time it wasn't that.
Because I remember there was some struggles in the sense that new co-op people, and there's some internal stuff, that there is in these dynamics, people in a crew, and there was some challenges there.
Yeah, so the co-op model is it's a shared ownership model. It's one person, one vote. So I could have 10 shares and you could have 1 share, but your vote is as strong as mine.
Right.
There's these 7 principles of cooperatives that sort of guide what a co-op should do in terms of levels of engagement. I should spout all 7 of them off right now, but they're not anywhere in my brain at the moment. But I did believe in those principles and wanted to have a model that allowed me to share responsibility with a group of people.
Yeah.
But the model itself doesn't make that happen. It's the people in the model that make it happen. And you could say the same thing about a capitalist model.
Anything.
Yeah, it could be super manipulative and exploitative, or you could, run a good business and pay people well and give them benefits and still make money. So that was a big lesson for me, is that you don't just start a co-op and then you're cooperative. Because
you might not be cooperating at all.
No, we didn't have a cooperative co-op because I had one of my main co-op partners hadn't bought into the model. And so it was a constant struggle for me to engage him and get him to take on certain roles. Right. And so this was actually a big change for me, because at that point, after that would have been about sort of 10 or 12 years of farming, I didn't have the energy to deal with that. Like farming and doing your production schedules and your marketing and your accounting and your markets, that takes up a lot of energy. And then having to deal with the dynamic that wasn't working over a long period of time, I didn't have the energy for. And that was the beginning. And I remember you had this a couple of times.
But it wasn't a co-op. Yes. But it was similar to a co-op.
Yeah, it's
basically was. I mean, it wasn't. We didn't change to a co-op in a business structure as you did, but we had 4 partners, equal partners.
Exactly.
And yeah.
Yeah, and it's very challenging. And there's rules to govern all that, either formally or informally. And at a certain point, I said to my main co-op partner at the time, because we had a kind of a silent co-op partner for a while, in order for the model to work, because you need 3 people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like a whole bunch of stuff happened there. Someone joined, couldn't stay in, so they left, and so it was complicated. And so what it comes down to is the co-op model itself didn't make the change. There needed to be more cooperation within it.
Yeah.
And it did. So it ended up taking a lot of energy. And within that, the starting of the co-op was also the time where we went from being a seasonal operation to year-round. We built the container.
That was the container, yeah.
Which was that was super innovative and a lot of stress. And
how many years have been in that container now? Is it 5?
This would be 40, 50. This is year 5.
Okay, yeah.
And it was a game changer, right?
Absolutely.
It was clearly a game changer. Revenue tripled in 1 year.
You could scale so quickly.
Yeah. You're not reestablishing relationships with clients every year.
Yeah.
All that stuff. It was really great.
Yeah.
But it was stressful trying to relearn a model, right? It was essentially a new business.
Yeah, it was.
It was a co-op. It was a new growing system. It's year round. It's a contained space. Like just learning how to work in that micro space was a new challenge.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and the infrastructure change. I remember witnessing it all, and it's really cool because one of the things that I appreciate about this model so much is that it's totally modular. It's just adding in blocks, right? And so you figure out your systems, and you guys had to figure out how you used that space. And then I even remember your post-harvest space changed in different incarnations, just because you looked at flow and you guys adapted it to that, which is smart.
Everything was based on, as we talk about flow and efficiency. And what was interesting, I was actually still able to use some of the old infrastructure. It changed purpose. So I used to grow in like these benches, right, which is with an opening door.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so for a while those became storage space, but then if we needed more production space in the summer, we could use
it up. Yeah, because in the summer they're easy.
Yeah, and in retrospect, you could grow in those year round in Vancouver. Actually,
your DTMs just would be a lot longer. In the winter.
You could heat them pretty well, right? And I always like, you open it up and the temperature is going to drop, but they heat up really well.
They heat up quick too. Yeah.
So there were lots of lessons in that, but it also allowed us to go from a really warm greenhouse in February to like one really cold day at the end of a cycle for peas, and just made a really nice pea.
It does.
So you could do all these things.
Does. Yeah.
So the point of all that being, so these things, change is stressful, and all that stuff was too much, I think, for me. And it was probably about 2 years into the co-op where I started to lose ambition, lose the drive.
I remember talking to you a lot back then.
Yeah, and then at that point it was a conversation to change members. So, I had a good long conversation with that member. It was a long process to get him to leave, but he left voluntarily. I brought new members in, and things got a little better. But I never got back to the level of ambition I had before.
Right.
And so to a degree, I was probably the one that was the fucking dead weight for a while, right? And never that bad, but I didn't have the same amount of energy because I put so much out, and I couldn't gain that back.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. I couldn't find enough time to get that energy back.
Wow.
And so, so this kind of speaks to this idea of, and I've talked about this before, and I think Diego and I have talked about this, is what the circumstances in your life, how they influence what a business looks like, how that business evolves.
That's right.
If I wasn't in school, maybe I would have done the container earlier.
Yeah.
If I, stayed in school longer, I might have stuck to the seasonal. Like, all these things were so intertwined with being a parent, having moved to a new city, being in school. And so I spent a lot of time talking to people about, what does your life look like, and
what's your context?
Can it change in order to make this happen?
That's so important. I mean, having you being in town, I've been thinking about this a lot lately myself too, and it speaks to the biggest piece of the whole thing for me is lifestyle. Is like, what do you want your lifestyle to be? What's your context now? How might that change? And how can you design what you do to make a living and provide for your family? What do you do, and how do you want that day to look? And so it's like, I mean, a lot of people they think, I want to grow microgreens, or I want to raise pastured poultry or things like that, but they don't really understand what the day in and day out is.
Right.
And that's one thing I say to farmers all the time is like, make a list of the top 10 tasks that any enterprise has, the things that have to be done day in and day out. Really understand those, and then ask yourself, can I see myself doing that 5 to 7 days a week?
Yeah.
And if you can't, then maybe that's not the enterprise for you. But there could be others that are for you.
Yeah. And I've done a similar thing. I've kind of said to people, I'm going to tell you what my week was this week. Monday we sowed. It was a pretty good day, but then this thing broke. And instead of being done at 3, I was working till 7. And then the next day was the market. But the wheel on the trailer got flat halfway. So, and I laid out this very intense week, right? Or that should have been a 30-hour week that turned into a 50-hour week.
Right.
And then in fairness, I'll say, let me tell you about another week. Beautiful harvest, everybody was on their game. It was, we've got a good flow. The crops were great. The watering was good. We had extra orders. People paid some overdue invoices in time. So we paid off some credit card debt, and, we got lots of compliments at the market.
Yeah.
And so part of it is the chaos of what life looks like, where one week is bliss and the next week is, oh my God, I want to step in front of a bus.
Yeah.
And some people can't handle that. They want to go to work every week and have a routine. And it's funny, I was thinking about this the other day after we had talked about, like, I don't do routine.
Yeah.
Every day I wake up is a new day for me. I don't get up, brush my teeth, do this thing. I sometimes get up and brush my teeth. Sometimes I get up and make coffee. Sometimes I get up and go walk out in the balcony. Sometimes it's very different for me. And so I try to design systems that work for that style.
Sure.
I don't want it to be too routine based.
Yeah, right.
Though while still seeing, you still need to have, this has to be done this day and this has to be done that day.
Yeah.
So...
But isn't that... I think that's so great, though, as an entrepreneur. And that's one thing I would never trade. And it's one of the things that I would actually never say is the thing that is the least appealing about being an entrepreneur. That sort of, some weeks are awesome, some weeks aren't great. I still think, when I look back in my life and I see that fluctuation, that gets me excited to... Well, I feel the excitement of that time in my memory.
Right.
Because... If your day is the same day in and day out for years, you look back at that time and you don't remember much.
No.
It's like only the poignant things would stick out. But when your life is up and down, I think this is partly what makes us resilient, or anti-fragile, as I should say.
Right.
Is the struggle makes you stronger, right? It makes you. It's like if you're in a university, for example, and you are you never have your ideas challenged. You're not going to be the best debater.
Yes.
Right? Because you haven't been rattled.
Yes.
When you get rattled, that makes you stronger, sharper, willing to improvise, ability to improvise, know. And these things are, you don't really learn those things anywhere else than actually just being an entrepreneur. You know?
You need to put yourself in difficult situations in order to learn to come up with solutions.
Yeah.
So I've never thought of myself as a good microgreens grower. I think of myself as someone who can manage tasks, who can anticipate challenges, who can make decisions on the fly, growing microgreens is just about managing a whole bunch of things at different scales. So I think that's important to understand that, and everything depends on you. There's no, if I don't do it, someone else will do it, which what happens on a lot of those 9-to-5 jobs, which is kind of nice as well. But you become, in essence, the maker of your own destiny.
Well, because in growing, every delayed action delays something in the future. With production. So if somebody forgets to plant sunflower on Monday, then
there's no crop the next Tuesday, right? The interesting thing is, so you mentioned the word struggle and the importance of struggle in terms of learning to grow and become stronger and more resilient or anti-fragile. The trick with that is, and we talked about this the other day, the struggle that becomes martyrdom. So, and when I got into agriculture, because I didn't see an economic opportunity, I didn't see a lifestyle. I did see a lifestyle, but I saw, I used to bartend in London, and I used to, have this whole different lifestyle, and it wasn't fulfilling. And, through certain readings, you get exposed to certain things. And after a while, I'm like, I want to have a more fulfilling life. And I think agriculture is the path there. And in the beginning, there was a lot of I need to work hard. It needs to be difficult. And over time, I learned, there's times of working hard and being difficult, but it can't always be that. It burns you out. It wears you down, right? So I think it's knowing when to struggle. It's when to do that stuff and when to let it go. And I'll admit I have a challenge with that, because my sort of underlying thing is, how do I make the world a better place in lots of little different ways? And one of the things that stresses my time and energy is just, oh, I could do that. I can help here. I can do that. And it ends up being too much. Or something that I think I can help with or engage with that I can't. I actually don't have the skill set, or I don't have the time or energy.
Right.
And so there's a struggle that comes with like just managing what is my capacity. And that's where I'm very much at right now. And that's where it very much was at the end of like, okay, getting out of farming. I'm beyond my capacity. The business needs a lot. My family needs a lot. Academia needs a lot. My recreation time needs a lot. My sleep needs a lot. I can't do all those things anymore. My energy is much more finite. My mental health was much more finite. I couldn't bounce back as quickly. So like a bad night of sleep was a week of recovery, not just like I'll be better by noon. So all those things, that's the kind of struggle that I think is important to avoid. And it's harder for some people to avoid.
Well, and the thing is that's kind of crazy about it with farmers, I know a lot of farmers, is they choose to be martyrs. Or they choose to suffer. And a lot of that comes down to a couple things I've been thinking about recently. Or one is that how important it is to figure out how you create value and double down on that. I think a lot of people, they choose a career, they choose a path in life, and they do things day in and day out that they really hate, and they complain about them, and they're bitching and moaning, and yet they continue to do them because they don't just pull the lens back a little bit and go, well, maybe I don't need to do all these things.
Right.
A lot of it is, especially with farmers, like family obligation. You get, you're tied to the farm. You can't leave. Yeah. You don't want to leave. Your family doesn't want you to leave. Or some people have, debt obligations or whatever they might be, but they just choose to keep doing it instead of just going, maybe you can just do something else.
It's true. And I've definitely been in that cycle for sure. Different versions of it. And that was one of the things that made me step away as well. Like, okay, this isn't working, and I need to do something different. Not knowing what different was for me. The thing is, I don't want to leave agriculture. I feel a lot of value in this.
Well, and you haven't. And that's what I kind of want to talk. I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing right now, because you're working with farm folks, city folk, which you have for a while.
Yes.
In contract here or whatever, and here and there. And you're involved in a seed, but is the seed thing through Farm Folk, City Folk, the seed trials you're doing and stuff like that?
It is. It was well before microgreens. It's one of the things that influence us is just who we meet at a certain time. So when I got into agriculture, I was a bartender. I left the job, moved to Vancouver Island, and started just immersing myself in agriculture. First thing that I came across was permaculture. It was first influence right away. The second thing was soil. No-till soil systems, reduced tillage soil systems. That's where I first learned about Elaine Ingham and the soil food web, like we were talking about earlier. And so I've never done, to this degree, a permaculture design course, interestingly enough. I draw from permaculture principles a lot, but I'm not drawn to it as much as I was in the beginning. And I ended up going to UBC to do my degree in soil science, right from that early influence. So the other early influence was seed. So in British Columbia, we have a number, at that time, there's probably 15 or 16 small-scale vegetable seed companies in BC. And every spring, they do the Seedy Saturday circuit and sell their seed directly to growers all over the province. And one of the growers that I sort of connected with and bonded with in the beginning was Patrick Steiner from Stellar Seeds. And Patrick went through his process of getting connected to seed, and there's many different ways, because this is the work I'm doing in my master's, is seeing how seed becomes part of people's lives. And so as part of his process, Patrick was really, how I recall it, was really interested in seed quality. Growing seed is easy. Growing good quality seed is hard. And so he had connected with a group in the U.S., the Organic Seed Alliance, and in particular Dr. John Navazio, who was an organic plant breeder. He came from the conventional realm, became an organic plant breeder, and was really leading the way in breeding crops for organic systems. And he's now the head plant breeder at Johnny's Selected Seeds in Maine. And so John had come up here in 2002, I think it was, at UBC, and did this 2 or 3 day workshop on farm seed production, plant breeding, genetics, and I was pretty hooked right from then. And John's been up here a dozen or more times, and I've coordinated bringing him up here. I've gone down to see his stuff in Washington State and all this stuff. So over the years, that's been a big influence. Having the Organic Seed Alliance right south of the border here in Washington State has been a big thing, because we can go down there for field days and see what they're doing in breeding. And so just over time, because that was the community I was in, seed became of interest. And I've never, actually thinking about this and what we were just talking about, I've never just farmed. I've always ran the farm and worked in a vineyard, ran the farm and worked for a nonprofit. Always had multiple things going on, and still do. I always feel a little more comfortable with that.
Yeah.
The idea of having a job is always been
of course.
And it might be just because I remember getting fired from my paper out when I was young, and getting fired from a restaurant job. I'm I feel vulnerable with a single job, right?
Exactly.
So I liked having multiple revenue sources. And so one of the things I did in the beginning was write some grants so I could do some work around seed advocacy. We did a survey among seed growers and farmers in BC to get a sense of what they were buying for organic seed and where they were sourcing it from, and what kind of seed saving they were doing. So really got into that world, and I think with a group of people sort of helped move that along. Now I went back to school and did the microgreens thing and stepped away from that for quite a few years. But then a chance came up at Farm Folk City Folk to get re-engaged with it. And that was around the same time that all the stuff was going on with the co-op. I'm I need something else.
Yeah.
So it was a really good, there was chaos and something needed to change, and this opportunity came up. And it wasn't something new, which would have been a lot of risk and a lot of trepidation. It was oh, I know this realm.
Yeah.
I actually helped get that going. Mm-hmm. So that got me into that, and that was 2015. And 3.5 years later, I'm still very deeply embedded in that. Beginning of 2017 is when I started my master's. Also, very much based in seed and seed systems and farmer seed networks, and. Yeah, it's the same thing. I'm drawn to seed because the people around me were drawn to seed. And the analogy, and maybe you edit this out at some point, is I've always thought people believe in God because their family believed in God.
Right.
I don't believe in God because my family didn't.
Right.
And if I grew up in a religious family, I would.
Right.
And so at those influential times in my life, seed was there, and that's what I hooked on to. I've made it my own, as we do, right? You started off in spin farming and you made it your own thing, right?
Yeah.
You took it to that next level. I don't think I've taken seed to the next level,
right?
But come up with my own understanding of it.
Yeah.
And it ties really well into the work we do, because the seed is, it's your primary agricultural input.
That's right.
And it really, your productivity is based on your seed, not just the performance of the seed, but the reliability of the company to get it to you, its pest resistance, its adaptability over time. And seed, to get into the politics over time, has become shifted from being a very common good, sort of a shared wealth with farmers in North America, to something that has become very privatized.
Especially with the advent of Monsanto suing farmers and stuff for seeds blowing in their fields.
Absolutely. There's so much. Well, it started off with hybrids, so the introduction of hybrid corn into the U.S. in the late 1920s. And that was the first time that farmers were buying seed that they could save, but they weren't going to get that uniformity in productivity in the second year. So it was the first time that farmers were sort of bound to continue to buy seed.
Yeah.
And within about 10 years, everybody in the Corn Belt ended up growing this hybrid corn.
It's an evolutionary continuance of specialization in a way, right? It's not all nefarious Monsanto and bad people trying to control people and all that. It's sort of a product of capitalism
Well,
in a way, right?
It is, and until that point, seed companies it was hard to be a seed company and be very profitable because, you know, if I sell you a car, you can't make a new car from that car.
That's right, yeah.
But once you have the seed, you've got the seed.
Yeah.
And in essence, once you've got the seed will get better and better if you're growing it and selecting it for what's doing well on your farm. So if you're like, okay, this crop is pretty good, I see some plants I don't like, I'm going to take them out and remove them from the gene pool.
But don't you think that that's part of the reason why it didn't go that way? Because that takes a level of specialization, like seed saving. I've visited a number of seed saving operations. I know a fair amount about the process, and there's a real craft to it.
There is.
And if you're running, I mean, it comes down to diversity of incomes versus more money but higher risk. You know, it's the idea of kind of spreading the risk as a farmer. We had the family farm, and then that specialized out.
Yeah.
That at some point it doesn't become economical in the sense that you can't be as competitive with other growers because you got to stop and save seed and do all that, you know.
Well, so you could say that, but you could make the same argument for, let's use microgreens. You know, you've got a farm here and you want to do microgreens, but you could get someone else to grow microgreens for you and just bring them in, right? You could do the same thing with salad greens. It's a very specialized thing. It's a very special technique. You need to learn that, right?
Yep.
It takes a few years. You screw up a lot of crops before you get those things down.
Right.
So seed is no different in that way.
Well, it is in a marketing way, though.
So
right? It's a different marketing period. It's a different customer.
So a couple of differences. One is you actually can't see the quality of the seed immediately.
That's right.
Right? Like,
yeah.
If I go to a brewery and I don't like the beer, I know I don't like the beer. If I get bad quality seed and I don't find out until after I've planted an acre of it, I'm screwed.
Exactly.
So there's that piece.
Well, the trials is like the laboratory of the seed business.
That's exactly
you know?
what it is.
It's great.
You've got to test stuff out.
Yeah.
Exactly. But the other piece is, and this is the challenge we're looking at now, is we're so off topic. This is great. Is your market? You know, I call food an absolute market. You sell food to everybody at every age, like basically at every point in their life. But seed is a very specialized market.
That's right.
Gardeners and farmers.
Yeah.
You know, you don't sell.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Oh, hello.
You don't sell seed to everybody. So
Yeah.
it's very specialized, and farmers have loyalty towards seed companies, and they're not willing to take risk because there's consequence if that seed doesn't work out.
Yeah.
So it's getting that seed to market that becomes such a big challenge.
That's
it's
right,
so
eh?
hard because it's such a select market, and you can't access it that easily. And what do you think of that?
But that's it's the marketing. I had a chance to hang out with Dan Brisbois, and I knew a decent amount about the seed business before, especially in how seed is harvested and threshed and all that stuff. But it was interesting to me the period of time it took to get seed grown, processed, packed, and sold, and even the timing of the seasonality of when you want to go for the market is interesting too. It's an interesting business, and it really, they do so much work in the winter. You don't think that they are, because you think it's growing the seed and all that, but growing the seed is pretty much just letting the plants go, right? It's not like agriculture where you need to be harvesting them on time.
Yeah, it is. It's a different cycle, and what it does is it front loads and rear loads a lot of the work. In between, once you're trellised and kind of managing things, it kind of does its own thing. But in the beginning, and from choosing the seed you're planting to save, right? So that's where it starts. But your harvest, you're getting it out of the field, hopefully before the rain, right? So it's a lot of timing.
That's right.
You're threshing, you're processing again to get it to a condition that it can go through a seeder, basically, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would be fairly easy. Packaging takes a lot of time and it's expensive, but this stuff happens in a season where the other field work is now done.
It's done.
And so there's a couple components to it that are interesting. Is if you look at it from a labor perspective, it allows you to keep labor on the farms year round. You shift from one thing to another. it also means your labor. So
which is a good and a bad thing.
It is a good. So it is. So like if
it's a thing.
Yeah. If you think about providing work, you can provide more work, which maybe means less staff turnover because people stay year after year and stay right through. They don't have to find another job.
But it also means that you might not be taking a vacation in the winter.
And this is a thing I hear from farmers a lot: is I go south for the winter. I work so hard during the growing season. The only way I can continue to do that is by having that time off.
Yeah.
But then you go into spring again, and you're selling online, you're selling at your farmers markets if you're doing them, and you're selling at CD Saturdays. So it's January, February, March. You've got all this revenue coming in. Well, other farms don't have that.
That's right.
They've got all the money's going out and buying seeds, getting amendments for the farm.
Yeah.
So then you're like, oh, okay, well, here's this new revenue source. It also means I'm probably growing the seed that I'm going to use myself, so I'm not buying them anymore. So I know the varieties, I know the history, I know the selection on them. I know, the literature says if I grow it on my farm year after year, I'm going to select for what does well, and the epigenetics are going to dictate that it's hopefully also going to improve.
Right.
So my yield is going to go up. My instance of resowing is going to go down. My disease pressure, if I'm doing good selection, is probably going to go down.
Yeah, those are all good potentials.
Yes,
not necessarily guarantees. And
that's where the craft comes in, right? Saving seed is one thing, but if I was to go through here, it's like, okay, let's save the seed from these leeks or these beets.
Yeah.
Oh, but we need to take that one and that one out.
Yeah.
Because they will not.
Yeah.
That will improve that seed for the next generation.
Yeah. Selection. Yeah. I mean, one thing, didn't surprise me, but one thing Dan Brisbois says is they don't use all their own seed.
No.
They still buy stuff from Johnny's.
Yes.
And High Mowing and places like that too, right? So yeah, it's an interesting business.
It's an interesting realm. It's a potential. It is for farmers as another potential revenue source. People are drawn to it because it's political.
Right.
Seed is so political. It has been for decades.
Sure.
And I enjoy, so I'm growing a carrot seed crop right now. I love the cycle. I love seeing, you see a carrot, it's a biennial, it takes 2 seasons.
Yep.
And I love, at the end of that, having this seed, this bin of seed.
Super cool. Yeah.
There is something about that, which, again, it speaks to the craft of it. It's the same thing. I see the craft of it when I go to the market and see just a beautiful presentation of salad greens. Or just beautiful bunches of beets, like clearly well grown, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, something about seed is just it's the potential that seed holds.
I often wonder, the more we kind of talk about these different types of enterprises, and you and I have done a few of them collectively, I guess, is if I don't know of anybody who's really done this very super well, but is the idea kind of a cooperative, but more just a stacked enterprise in the sense that there's a grand operation, LLC or whatever, corp, and then there's all these sort of guaranteed corps amongst it that the idea is we're all going to sell to it, but we all have 100% skin in the game.
Right.
But it's sort of a little racket in a way, because it's like you're all agreeing to cooperate.
Yeah.
You're going to grow the seed, and we're going to buy it from you.
Yeah.
You're going to grow vegetables, we're going to buy them from you, and that way you can have the winter off, you can have the summer off, because it's like if you're managing the business, chances are you're not going to find 5 awesome employees that are going to run every single one of those enterprises the way you want it year round, where you can just take a 2-month vacation. Chances are that's not going to happen. But in an enterprise like this, where everybody has their own skin in the game to pay the bills and do what they need to do, then maybe it could.
So seed is a good example, and you could use the same thing with farming. And we talked about this with Ferrum Tournesol the other day. Like everyone kind of specializes in one thing on the farm.
But they're still a cooperative, right? Though, like they're carrying each other's. If somebody's not being a net gain, they're gonna carry. People are gonna feel lag from them.
So there's a couple models that exist right now in the seed world. So as I mentioned, the dominant model in BC right now is small scale seed company, basically a sole proprietor. They probably market garden, but might just grow seed. They grow 50 to 200 varieties. They pack them and sell them at CD Saturdays and online all themselves. These small packet companies, it's a really interesting phenomenon in BC. There's so many of them. Now, there's a variation on that where some of those companies are growing and packing a lot of their seed, but they've also got other growers growing for them. So they're contracting a portion of that out. So it takes a little bit of pressure off them as a company, allows them to grow more stuff, because then you can grow 2 types of beets or 3 types of beets.
There's a benefit to that, and that you can avoid cross-pollination.
Yeah.
Right?
So, but there's a benefit as well to the contracted seed grower. I'm going to grow you 1 crop or 2 crops.
That's right.
And I don't have to worry about the marketing, the packaging. Actually, in one of the models, they send you the packages, you pack them up and then send them back. And you get a cut of each package.
Yeah.
And it's actually a fairly good model for people. They do fairly well on that. So you've got the sole proprietor seed company, we do everything. You've got the sole proprietor seed company that contracts some of that out, which is mutually beneficial. And then in 2014, a co-op was formed in BC, the BC Eco Seed Co-op. And that's the idea, that same thing. The co-op is the seed company, and everybody is a member and grows and sells to the co-op. And the co-op markets on your behalf and sells on your behalf.
Right.
So same thing, instead of growing 50 or 200 crops, you're growing 1, 2, maybe up to 5, whatever you want. You're selling them to the co-op packs them, ships them, and does all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a model as well. And that could be done as a co-op or not as a co-op.
And it's even a similar model to the aggregator model, like Spud.
Yeah.
Or what you guys tried to do with Food Peddlers that one time when you were doing a delivery CSA. It's a cool model, because so much of the work in farming, it's the one thing that most people don't talk about, is the marketing.
Right.
And so if somebody can do that for you, growing is easy. Like right now, I mean, I'm doing some production for one guy who will buy a bed of a crop. I give him a fixed price.
Right.
And he'll have a little bit of risk to play with there, but it's mostly his gain.
Right.
And like here, $200 to have this crop I harvested, and you just take it.
Right.
I'll wash it, but I'm not going to bag it into case lots. It'll just go into loose boxes or totes, and you can take it.
Yeah.
If you can get that kind of a customer, even though you might get a little bit less than of an ideal price, sometimes because it saves you so much customer service, and
your net return is the same. It's very close.
Yeah.
People don't talk about net return enough. They're like, I could sell this, microgreens, $20 a flat.
Yeah.
Minus the seed, the soil, the labor, your insurance, your electricity costs, and you still come out on top. But you can't just think $20.
Yeah.
You can't think $3 a seed pack. You can't think, so. And people don't like to wholesale, because they feel, well, why would I sell it to you for $3.50 a pound when I can sell it here for $6 a pound?
Yeah.
Because it costs you $2.50 in labor and marketing and everything else to get it there.
That's right.
And
that's right.
Yeah. So I more and more am attracted to that model of like grocers, restaurants.
Me too.
Taking a hit and screw the farmers market.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just think about selling to some top chefs, though. Even is the amount of like the constant text messages, the late calls, the oddball requests, the late payments, stuff like that. All those things really stack in, and some of those things are really hard to track as far as like your time in, because it's not like standing at a farmer's market for 6 hours.
Yeah.
It's like, how many times did this dude call me? How many times did I have to follow up with him to get paid? How much time does that stack up for this invoice?
Yeah. and going back to what you mentioned earlier, is this the lifestyle I want? That somebody can always be demanding of my time? 7 o'clock at night, it's your time. But you get the text, you respond to it, right? And so it is tricky. You need to know what you're capable. And for many years, I was fine with that. Yeah, I don't mind. Perfect. Yeah, fine. But at a certain point, you're like, no.
I'm surprised that you were, even when you were a parent, because ever since I've had my daughter, I'm just zero tolerance for that.
Right.
Like my time is way more important to me.
When I was doing microgreens, though, it wasn't that same thing. Like, here's our 5 crops. We the system right from the beginning. We deliver Tuesdays and Fridays between this time. This is the invoice system. These are the crops. That's
it. Yeah.
And it was very,
easy.
We set it up that way and got more strict over time. Actually shifted away from cash sales so we could track things better.
Yeah.
No last minute orders. Like, so, maybe. But we sow to order. So if you don't have a standing order in, it's a crapshoot, right?
Yeah, right.
So that stuff makes it easier. It becomes more about you than the customer to a degree, but it also means you need that in order to continue providing to the customer. So that level of self-care ensures that you can continue.
Yeah.
If you stretch yourself too thin, and this is what happened with our food peddler CSA model, we got stretched too thin.
Yeah, because you were doing the microgreens and doing that.
This was
craziness.
But this was another thing, though. I had a business partner for that, and he moved on to something else. And I thought I could do it on my own with a new crew, and I couldn't.
Right, but then he left, and you're like, I can't carry this, impossible.
So it had to be the two of us going on, right? And I did. I called people up and sent $24,000 in CSA payments back to people in 1 week.
I did that 1 year too.
Yeah, and that was on the Wednesday before my first Saturday delivery.
Yeah.
And that was the first time, I think that was my first memory of severe anxiety.
Yeah.
And I called up a friend. I'm like, I need to work something out here. And she just said to me, she's like, just don't do the CSA. Just give them their money back. I'm like, oh. And right away I'm like, yeah. I emailed everybody. I called everybody. I had their payments back. I probably lost $1,000 because I bought some things.
Yeah.
But I bought a bunch of bins from Canadian Tire. I took them back.
Sure. Right.
So in the end, and there was a few people that were disappointed, but not nearly as disappointed as they would be if halfway through the season they stopped getting stuff.
Exactly.
So that's a lesson in learning to cut your losses.
That's right.
And hopefully preserve your reputation.
And you can wipe your hands clean with it and know you did the best you can.
It was instant relief. It was instant relief. and it's funny, I've just gone through the same thing. I've had a very busy summer. I'm overstretched. What can I drop? What am I not doing well? Well, I was too stretched to really focus on my academic work, and I thought about it, and I went to my advisor. I'm like, I need to take leave. Mm-hmm. I can't produce the work I need to with my current schedule. I made a mistake. I took on more than I can handle. Part of it was maybe not having a lot of insight, and part of it is my capacity's changed. I'm still thinking I can do more than I can. And so it's just like, and it's like, I was nervous about the conversation, but what she said was, this is good. More people need to do this. You need to know when to step back and regroup and then get back in.
It's so important. Yeah. Knowing when to hold them, knowing when to fold them.
Yeah.
As Kenny Rogers puts it.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about the future. We talked a little bit about, you kind of liked the idea of getting back into farming, but not where you're bootstrapping it yourself.
Yeah, no way. So I couldn't do it right away. I'd need a decompression period. Mm-hmm. And as you go through seasonally, but
and a year and a half isn't long enough yet.
No, because I've been so busy with other things.
I haven't
had time to rest in general. The idea of getting back into farming would be as part of a crew, of an enterprise, and I'm doing one thing. Yeah. It would be great to do, say I moved to Kelowna, we want to do something like, I just do microgreens, and you do ground crops, and somebody else does, pork, and someone does marketing, and I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. We meet and do what we need to do collaboratively, but I just do microgreens. Yeah. Someone even takes care of the seed purchasing. It's like, we do some stuff together.
Right.
I'm just a production guy. I keep an eye on that. I make sure it's immaculate all the time, and that's it. The idea of being the market guy, the bookkeeper, the grower, the troubleshooter.
So would it be if let's just pretend I was an investor and I said, hey, I want to start an all-star farm. I want to get Chris Thoreau doing the microgreens. I want Jean-Martin Fortier doing the field production or whatever.
Yeah.
Would it be microgreens that you would actually want to do, or would it be something else? Are there other enterprises? Just think about the broader food system as we know it in small farming. Are there other parts that interest you? Because you did have experience with field production in your early days.
Yeah, so my early days of field production was more it wasn't regimented and super efficient. Okay. I was more, my interest in food then was more about self-sufficiency and living off the land and understanding that. And I still did markets and stuff, but I wasn't super into a strict production system, which was a mistake on my part. But once again,
but you were starting out. It was early days.
It was there, and I was doing other things. So I was working for a nonprofit. I was working in some vineyards because I was just exploring what I wanted to do. What I would probably do now would be seed production.
Yeah,
and there'd be a couple aspects I'd be looking at. One is, can it be profitable? Mm-hmm. What needs to happen for it to be profitable? And two, there'd be actually 2 and 3. 2 is, keeping good track of, keeping those batches, lots of seed going, and measuring and documenting adaptability. Is it germinating faster in my site? Is it getting less disease? Is my selection working?
The trials would be the funnest part for me.
Yeah,
that's what I would want to do.
And that's one of the things that everybody might do together, right? Like,
yeah,
let's look at the stuff together. There'd be portions when you get into other people's work, but you would do your own. So that would be one thing, looking at that adaptability, and then looking at, I sell tomato seed to so-and-so in Nova Scotia, and they tell me they've been saving that seed for 5 years. Well, after 5 years, I asked them to send me that seed, and I planted out against the original seed from 5 years ago.
Right.
And then my seed from now, and so we've got 5-year-old seed from here, now seed from here, and now seed from Nova Scotia, and we're growing these out against each other.
It's cool. You're stacking time in a way where you could cross those things, and it's such a neat idea to think how you could have seed 1,000 years old right now if
Absolutely.
it was preserved, and germinate it and cross it with something now. You're pollinating eons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or decades of time in there.
Yeah.
It's a neat idea to think where a hybrid or what crossing those things where they would go. What were the conditions different then than they are now?
Yeah, and this is a sort of a critique of ex situ, like gene banks, versus in situ, which is growing in the ground, preservation. If I grow a crop year after year and I do good selection and I save that seed, it's adapting along the way.
That's right.
If I take that seed and stick it in a vault and then 10 years later come and get it because I need it,
everything's different.
Chances are it's going to be very difficult for that crop, and I'd have to go through that adaptation again.
Yeah.
Or maybe it does fail. It for whatever reason, something has changed enough that crop can't thrive anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's fairly doomsday, because what I see...
Well, isn't that that's the doomsday vault?
There is the doomsday vault.
in Norway or whatever.
And most of those, the seed is in there, like there'd be a lot there, there'd be a lot regionally, and there'd be people growing it. So you have multiple checks in that.
I've seen that seed vault thing mentioned many times, and I've never in conversations, looking at comments and things like that on these blogs, anybody really making comments about the fact that is quite fragile in a way. I mean, sure, it serves a purpose, but it seems like it could be a better enterprise if it was stacked in with a team of people that were regrowing and saving these seeds each year. But what an expense that would be in to operate.
Anybody who's doing a good job of that, that's exactly what they would be doing. So like the vault itself doesn't grow its own seeds and store it there. Like they don't. It's people submitting samples. So I might grow out an acre of beets that I've been breeding. I continue to grow it out and do selection. I sell the seeds so other people are growing it out and do selection. I store some locally, and I store some in the seed bank. And then maybe every 5 years I withdraw from the seed bank, I grow it out again, I stick some back in, I freshen up the lot. So it's one, we often think of things as silver bullets, right? And we think of the Svalbard vault as sort of this savior, but it's just one piece of a lot of tools that a well-organized seed grower or organization would use to preserve the genetic integrity, which means backup in case shit really hits the fan, you have a major crop failure, or your seed bank locally burns down, and that's happened a few times. There's been damage that way. So it's sort of your last resort. But it's in a place where it's well stored, it's secure, besides the flooding they had a few years ago. It was just about a year and a half ago because the permafrost is melting, right? So this idea that you can put it in the Arctic because it's going to be permanently frozen,
maybe not such a good idea.
Well, and that doesn't hold true anymore because things are changing, right?
Yeah.
And so it goes back to the idea, we know at this point, it's as indisputable as it can be about the effects of climate change and the reality of climate change, which speaks even more to the importance of growing that seed out year after year.
Exactly, is adapting to things now.
Okay, but so this is great, but you don't grow seed.
No.
Because it doesn't fit into your system. It's the OPs are not as productive as hybrids. And,
I do some OPs,
you know,
but mostly hybrids, for sure.
So the trick is our smaller scale systems are based around a productivity that doesn't incorporate seed very well.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very true.
And there's ways to do it. So this is where I think you need people who are committed to seed, just like some people are committed to microgreens, some people are committed to livestock, some people are committed to permaculture. It's not that one system is better than the other. It's that there needs to be all these mechanisms. And different models. So like Ferrum Turnasol again is a great example. Seed production was integrated into their crops, then they sort of separated it into its own enterprise. So seed production happens here, crop production happens there. They grow their own, they grow for others, they have others grow for them. So we need those stewards to do that piece, but there has to be an economic case for it.
Absolutely.
Right? And
Absolutely.
So this is one of the pieces of work we're looking at. In the work I've done moving on from farming, this is how I stay connected, right? I still feel I'm contributing in a way, but it's not through my brawn anymore.
Yeah, the
right?
day-to-day grind. Yeah.
Yeah, and it could be, you know, I could end up growing a bigger seed crop and doing that, but with the intent of demonstrating this to share that experience and get more people to consider, like, I could grow seed. I'd grow a seed crop for that co-op. I'd grow a seed crop for that company. Because if we don't do that, then these other companies will. And the seed company consolidation in the past 3 years has become about as concentrated as it can possibly be.
Just like the media, just like the banks.
Yeah, it's very intense. And I think what we're demonstrating in BC is you can do a lot of regional seed production. It's just a matter of having the right scale.
It's a huge black swan in society, hey?
Yeah.
That whole thing that's happening with seed.
Yeah.
It's one thing for it to happen with banks. It's one thing for it to happen with media companies.
Yeah.
But those things don't put food on your plate.
No.
Those things don't produce everything that everybody eats. So
and
it's a big one.
Yeah, it's true. And it's really easy to, you know, there was in Oregon a few years ago, there's a lot of beet seed production in Oregon. And Monsanto, I think it was Monsanto, someone released a GMO sugar beet in Oregon, and beet growers there were furious because if that cross pollinates, your organic integrity is lost, so you lose that, and you can't contain it, right? And this is a long-standing argument that we don't really need to rehash. But it's all the different ways in which seed is protected. You've got hybridization, you've got licensing, so you don't actually ever own the seed. You're just kind of you're planting it on behalf of the company in a way. You never have ownership of it. You're never allowed to save it.
That's right.
You know, that's the condition of you having the seed. Just like renting a movie.
Yeah.
You know,
it's the same you get it for one-time use.
Yes, exactly.
Right? That's what it is. It's
there's plant variety protection. There's patenting. So there's all these mechanisms that just make seed so much more just solely a commodity.
Yeah.
As opposed to looking at seed as we should consider, or many people consider looking at agriculture as a public good. It's not just another revenue generating, wealth generating concept. It's the core thing that allows us to exist. And so seed plays a big role in that. And you know, Jack Kloppenberg's classic quote is, you know, he who controls the seed controls the food system.
That's right.
And it very much is true.
And he who controls the food controls the people.
It's exactly
I think Henry Kissinger says that.
Yeah,
but I agree with that on many different ways. I've heard that slogan that farming is a public service. Frankly, I think that's ridiculous. To turn something into like a public utility that the government controls. Well, no, that's just another type of monoculture.
It's a public good, though, right?
Like, a public good. So it's different.
A park is a public good.
So saying a public good and a public service are two different things. So if you're saying a public good, I can understand that. To say that it's a public service sounds horrible to me. It's like forced unions and crown corporations, like in BC with the ICBC and things like that. This is horrible.
I think it's more about, you know, turning off like seed is our shared heritage, right?
Right.
So there's some very important.
There's a huge cultural thing to it in a way.
There is.
And agriculture, right? This is
absolutely. And so I do think seed is one of the exceptional cases. Yeah, different from banks and media, right? Even though those things are very key, you know, you have to have a bank account. Yeah. Pretty much, right?
Yeah. But if the bank account goes away and the media companies go away, we still got food. We can still grow food.
Yes. And to be honest, if I was to be really devil's advocate, things can get concentrated and concentrated. Like the worse things get, people are going to revolt.
Right, of course.
And people in a way are like.
This is a cycle of history that happens.
Yeah. And the seed system here in BC, even though it's small scale, there's an aspect of politicalism to it. There's defiance in it, and it really is people wanting to make seed available for people, not just. It's solely and primarily being a commodity.
Strictly bottom line.
Yeah. And I actually don't think there's a problem with seed being something you buy and sell.
Yeah.
Great. But to restrict, and the big thing is restricting people's ability to save that seed.
That is crazy.
And the reality is, people don't mind buying hybrid seed because they're not saving the seed, right?
Yeah.
And even with the OPs, it's like, I'm willing to pay more for seed because you've put the money into developing that seed that performs well on my farm.
And I get that,
And I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think as long as there's some fair, like seed prices don't start going through the roof. And one of the challenges is actually the diversity of varieties on the market is becoming narrowed.
That's right.
This is a problem with all crops, not just vegetables, but
that's right.
Cereals and legumes, like buckwheat, like 5 varieties of buckwheat in the world, when there used to be thousands, right?
Yeah.
So this is where we get into the diversity argument, and that diversity really is key, because if something goes wrong with, the Cavendish banana, for example, they're all screwed. So you need that diversity. That's where the resilience comes from.
It's interesting with the seed conversation is it's almost the conversation that was had in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. In the 80s it was replicating tapes. In the 90s it was burning CDs, and in the 2000s it was Napster.
Yeah.
It's actually the same idea. So maybe instead of saying seed is a public good, it's better to almost refer to it in an open source way. Because you have paid for a product, and now you should be able to use that product.
So there is
and saving seed, just like making a tape for your grandmother, or sharing your Metallica album on Napster. You've paid for the product, and you're not taking anything away from the proprietor who made it by sharing it. So it's kind of the open source argument, right?
So there is a group out of the University of, founded at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, called the Open Source Seed Initiative, and it's based very much on open source software, and the quote you see in that is it's free as in speech, not as in beer. So
brilliant. Brilliant.
And it's a great summary, and the Open Source Seed Initiative's pledge is, I've developed this crop, I'm delivering it to the public through Aussie. It's an open source variety, which means you can
anybody
save
has
the
the right
seed,
to save it.
You can breed from it, and anything you breed from it you cannot protect. So if you look at the stuff that Monsanto and all these companies have patented and protected, it completely disregards all the work that took to get it there. Mm-hmm. All that because it wasn't modern or technologically driven or innovative. It was just farmers selecting seed over generations. Those farmers took teosinte, this tiny little useless plant that had tiny little bits of food on it, into these massive cobs of corn, right? And then Monsanto is just taking that, changing one thing and going, okay, well now we're going to patent that.
Yeah.
And so what Aussie is saying is, we understand, open source doesn't mean you can't make revenue from it. You should still collect royalties, but nobody can take this and now protect it and limit other people's use of it.
That's right, exactly.
The terminology used in plant breeding is often like, you don't want to reduce somebody's freedom to operate. And what a lot of the sort of the vegetable seed growers or plant breeders and guys working in organics, they say, 20, 30 years, I could call up a colleague at another university and say, hey, can you send me some seeds? They'd be like, great. Now there's material transfer agreements and licensing agreements and contracts, and I think there's some good in that now these programs at universities can actually develop a seed, license that seed if they want, and they decide on the licensing, so they can allow some breeding and allow some saving, but then they're generating revenue for their program. So then you don't have Syngenta or Monsanto or Cargill funding programs and guiding the research.
Yeah.
You're generating revenue through the seed you've developed and sold and licensed to feed your program.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know one of the breeders, Bill Tracy in Wisconsin, he has a very open licensing agreement. So you can take this and you can breed with it. If you do a cross and then back cross it to this, you have to pay me royalties. But if you cross it to something else and breed something new, it's yours.
So it's cool that there's those positive models out there that maybe some people who are working for Monsanto or Syngenta would go, hey, maybe that's a better model for us to operate under, because it's a little bit less like unscrupulous.
It is.
And just screwing people over.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's this idea that even if Monsanto wasn't protecting their seeds, people still wouldn't be saving them. People don't seed save.
Yeah.
Their farming system doesn't allow for it.
Exactly.
You could I could go to the farmer's market and you can tell me how you make your bread and how you make your pesto and how you make that really, really good chocolate zucchini bread. I still don't have a recipe for it.
Doesn't mean you're going to go do it.
But I'm not likely to do it.
No.
And there's going to be a piece of that process that you're not going to tell me. You know, like with all the microgreens consults I've done, there's a few little things that I've never told anybody. Never told anybody. It's just like, or I've told them and just like, oh, you got to do this.
But
and people don't understand how important that is.
Sure.
Yeah, and so it's more than just about the ingredients or the process. It's little things in there, right?
And it's TLC too. You know, there's so much to it.
Yeah.
So we've gone quite a while already. I think it's good to leave it there. So I think we can all assume that that's going to be the direction that Chris Thoreau is kind of pursuing for the next little while. Is the seed thing, and
it is the seed thing, and I look at, interestingly, going back to where we started with this, I think going into seed with the mindset and skill set I have now around agriculture and life in general, along with the skill gaps, getting into agriculture as a seed grower, I think, is going to be less strenuous. Mm-hmm. You know, it's going to be that focus near the end of the season with processing, but it's not going to be that day in, day out system. So it's a way to get back in.
You can do some camping trips in the summer.
You can do some camping trips
with that kind of lifestyle. It's
Absolutely.
Just kind of cool.
So I think that's the way, is finding a new way to do it, just like I did with microgreens. Finding a new way to do agriculture that's easier on my body, easier on my mind, and is something I can continue to do and appreciate and still feel fulfilled without being stressed out.
Well, and as much as I know that you're a systems guy, I can expect that there'll be good things to be learned and shared with that.
Absolutely,
and new content, and who knows. So, okay, so we'll leave it there. But guys, I'm going to leave at the end of this video Chris's video, the one that I did with him. That's probably the most popular one. And I'm also going to leave the video for Farm Tournesol, which is, Chris and I have mentioned a lot. They're a seed saving operation in Quebec that if you're interested in seeds, you should check those out.
Yeah,
all right.
And I'll send you links to a few of the other things we've talked about if people want to follow up on those resources as well.
Sure, fantastic.
With Odyssey and whatnot,
All right. Well, thanks, Chris.
Nice one.